I'd always thought I had a solid marriage. Jennifer and I had been together for nearly 10 years, and sure, we'd had our ups and downs. What couple doesn't? But we'd survived the rough patches, and I always thought we were better for it. I loved her, and I believed she loved me, too. But something had changed over the past few months. The warmth between us had slowly faded, replaced by a subtle but undeniable distance. At first, I convinced myself it was just work stress. Jennifer had taken on more responsibilities at her job, working late into the evening, attending weekend events, and making spontaneous business trips. It made sense. We both had demanding careers. But as time passed, the excuses started to feel a little too rehearsed, a little too convenient. The first real sign that something wasn't right happened one evening while we were watching TV together, something we hadn't done in what felt like ages. She was sitting next to me on the couch, but her attention was elsewhere, on her phone. Every few minutes, she'd glance at it, a small, almost imperceptible smile flickering across her lips. I ignored it at first, but then I noticed the pattern. She'd unlock her phone, read a message, smile, and then lock the screen, slipping the phone back onto her lap. Like she didn't want me to see. "You're on that thing a lot tonight," I said, trying to sound casual. She glanced up, almost startled, then flashed me a quick smile. "Oh, just work stuff," she said, slipping the phone into her pocket. "You know how it is." I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. But inside, the first seed of doubt had been planted. The changes in her behavior didn't happen overnight, but gradually, they became harder to ignore. She started coming home later than usual, always with an excuse about staying late for a project or meeting with a colleague. There were more work trips, more late-night phone calls, and more messages that she was quick to dismiss if I asked about them. One night, after she'd come home late for the third time that week, I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past few months in my mind. Something was off, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid, overbearing guy who thinks every late meeting is a sign of infidelity. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I remember the first time I seriously considered the possibility that Jennifer might be cheating. It was a Thursday evening, and she was in the shower, her phone sitting on the bathroom counter. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but something tugged at me that night. Something in the pit of my stomach told me to check. I hesitated, staring at her phone, my mind racing. I'd never invaded her privacy before. We were married, and marriage was supposed to be built on trust, right? But trust was exactly what I was starting to lose. Before I could stop myself, I picked up her phone. It was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. We'd always been open about those things, back when we didn't have anything to hide. I typed in the code, and the screen unlocked. My hands were trembling as I scrolled through her messages, my heart racing in my chest. Most of them were mundane, work-related, conversations with her mom or a few friends. But then I found the messages from him. They weren't labeled with a name, just an initial, C. At first, nothing about the messages screamed affair. They were short, mostly harmless, but as I scrolled further back, the tone began to change. What started as work-related banter had gradually shifted into something more personal, flirty, intimate. "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Missed you. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to do it again." I felt my stomach drop as I read the messages, each one hitting me like a punch to the gut. There it was, the proof I hadn't wanted to find. Jennifer was cheating on me. I stood there, gripping her phone tightly, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to storm into the bathroom, confront her right then and there. But the other part of me, the rational part, told me to wait, to gather more information. I needed to know just how deep this betrayal went. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Every time I looked at Jennifer, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. How long had she been seeing this guy? Was it just a fling, or something more serious? I had too many questions and not enough answers. I needed proof. I needed to be sure. So, I did what I'd done for clients 100 times before. I started investigating. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years as a private investigator, tracking down cheaters and liars for other people, and now I was doing the same thing to my own wife. I started small. I kept an eye on her behavior, noting the times she left for work, the nights she came home late. I paid attention to the times she was glued to her phone, the moments when she seemed distracted or distant. Every little detail became a clue in the case I was building against her. But that wasn't enough. I needed more. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I installed a GPS tracker on her car. It was a simple device, one I'd used countless times for clients, and Jennifer would never notice it. The tracker would give me her exact location in real time, allowing me to see where she was going when she claimed to be working late or meeting with friends. The next few days were tense. I tried to act normal around her, pretending like nothing was wrong, but inside, I was a mess. Every time she left the house, I checked the tracker, watching as she drove to work or ran errands. But then, one evening, something strange happened. She said she was going to a work event, but the tracker showed her driving across town to a small cafe. I watched in real time as she parked outside, and a few minutes later, C showed up. I felt a wave of anger wash over me as I watched them through the GPS app, sitting together inside the cafe, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching their every move. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. I had proof, but I still wasn't ready to confront her. I needed more. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal before I made my move. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Every day, I watched as Jennifer continued to lie to my face, pretending that everything was fine while sneaking off to meet C behind my back. I followed her every move, every secret meeting, every late-night rendezvous. I documented it all, storing away photos, videos, and messages that I would eventually use to confront her. But as I dug deeper into her affair, I started to notice something strange. C wasn't just an average guy. There was something off about him, something that didn't sit right with me. I started doing some background research, looking into his social media profiles, his job, his connections. He worked in finance, but there were gaps in his employment history, odd discrepancies that didn't add up. The more I looked into him, the more I realized that C was hiding something, too. One night, I decided to dig deeper. I hacked into his email account, a skill I'd picked up over the years in my line of work, and what I found confirmed my suspicions. C wasn't just having an affair with my wife. He was involved in something much bigger, something criminal. Emails between him and a group of unnamed contacts revealed that C was laundering money through his finance company, using offshore accounts and fake transactions to hide millions of dollars. He was in deep, and Jennifer had no idea. Suddenly, the affair seemed like a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Jennifer wasn't just cheating on me with another man. She was unknowingly involved in something dangerous, something that could ruin her life in more ways than one. And that's when I realized that my revenge could be more than just personal. I could take down C and his entire operation, and in doing so, I could destroy everything Jennifer had built. But I had to be patient. I had to wait for the perfect moment. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something far bigger than just a simple affair. Sure, Jennifer had betrayed me, and that was bad enough. But discovering that C was involved in serious financial crimes, money laundering, no less, took everything to a whole new level. I spent hours at night, poring over C's emails, tracing the digital breadcrumbs he'd left behind. He wasn't careful, not the way I would have been. It was almost like he thought no one would be looking, like he was invincible, that arrogance would be his downfall. I found offshore accounts, wire transfers, names of shell companies that existed only on paper. This was serious, and the deeper I went, the more I realized that C was playing a dangerous game. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down, not just for him, but for Jennifer, too. She might not have known about his illegal dealings, but she was tied to him now, whether she liked it or not. And that's when the idea of revenge started to crystallize. This wasn't just about catching my wife in the act anymore. It was about taking down the man who had ruined my life and making sure Jennifer paid for what she'd done. I had the skills, I had the evidence, and now I had the motive. But it wasn't time yet. I needed to gather more, to make sure that when I finally made my move, there would be no escape for either of them. Jennifer's behavior continued to evolve, and I could tell she was feeling the strain of keeping up the lie. She'd become more secretive, more paranoid. She was careful about her phone now, keeping it close to her at all times, and she was vague about where she was going and who she was with. But I didn't need her to tell me. The GPS tracker on her car and the spyware on her phone were doing the job just fine. I watched every move she made, listened to every conversation she had. It was like I had front row seats to my own personal tragedy. Every time she sent C a message, every time they met at some out-of-the-way hotel or bar, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I kept up the act, playing the part of the oblivious husband. She had no idea I knew everything, and that was exactly how I wanted it. One evening, as she sat across from me at the dinner table, scrolling through her phone while absent-mindedly poking at her food, I watched her closely. She looked tired, worn out by the lies she was juggling, the double life she was leading. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she smiled at something on her phone, a private little smile that wasn't meant for me. I knew who it was meant for, and any sympathy I might have had disappeared in an instant. Something funny? I asked, keeping my tone casual. She glanced up, startled, her smile fading quickly. "Oh, no," she said, locking her phone and setting it face down on the table. "Just a work thing." Work. Right. I resisted the urge to call her out on the lie, to tell her I knew exactly who she was messaging, but I held back. There was no point in revealing my hand just yet. Instead, I smiled. "You've been busy with work a lot lately." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking back to her phone for a split second. "Yeah, it's just been a crazy few months. You know how it is." I nodded, taking a sip of my wine. "Yeah, I know." The next few weeks were a blur of surveillance, research, and planning. Every spare moment I had was spent either tracking Jennifer's movements or digging deeper into C's criminal dealings. I'd managed to trace the flow of money through his network, following the path from his clients to the offshore accounts where the dirty cash was laundered and made clean again. He was using his finance company as a front, funneling millions through legitimate-looking transactions that hid the true source of the money. But it wasn't perfect. No operation like this ever is. There were cracks in the system, small inconsistencies that I could exploit. I just had to be careful. One wrong move, and I'd tip C off that I was onto him. And if he realized that, Jennifer would figure it out too. I was walking a fine line, but it was a line I'd walked before. I was patient, meticulous. I wasn't going to rush this. I'd wait for the right moment, and when it came, I'd strike. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jennifer had no idea she was sleeping next to the man who was about to destroy her life. Every night, she'd lie beside me, oblivious to the fact that I knew everything. And every night, I'd stay awake, planning my next move. It was late one night, long after Jennifer had gone to bed, when I finally found what I was looking for. I'd been following a trail of emails between C and one of his partners, a man named Roberts, who was knee-deep in the money laundering operation. The emails were vague, coded in a way that would make it hard to prove anything if you didn't know what you were looking for. But I knew the signs. I'd seen this kind of thing before. They were planning a big move, an offshore transfer that would send millions to a new account in the Cayman Islands. It was all going down in a week, and once the money was moved, there would be no way to trace it. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. If I could intercept that transfer, if I could expose C and his operation, everything would come crashing down. The authorities would be all over him, and he'd have no way to worm his way out of it. And Jennifer? She'd be caught in the middle. Her connection to C would come to light, and even if she wasn't directly involved in his crimes, her reputation would be ruined. She'd lose everything, her job, her friends, her life as she knew it. But I needed to be smart. I couldn't just send the information to the authorities and hope they'd figure it out. No, I needed to control the narrative. I needed to make sure that when this all came to light, it would happen on my terms. So, I started setting things in motion. The first step was getting close to Roberts. I needed to get inside his head, figure out how he operated. I couldn't risk contacting him directly, but I could plant some bait, some small inconsistencies in the data that would make him nervous. A few well-placed rumors about an investigation into offshore accounts, a subtle warning that someone might be onto him. It didn't take long for the paranoia to set in. Over the next few days, I watched as Roberts grew increasingly anxious, sending frantic emails to C, asking if their operation had been compromised. C tried to reassure him, but I could tell from the tone of the messages that he was starting to sweat, too. That was my opening. I sent an anonymous tip to a contact I had in the financial crimes unit, someone I trusted to keep things quiet until the time was right. I fed them just enough information to start looking into C's operation, but not enough to blow the whole thing open just yet. I needed them to move slowly, methodically, so that when the hammer finally dropped, there would be no escape. At the same time, I continued to follow Jennifer, watching as she met with C at their usual spots, the same cafes, the same hotels. It was almost comical how predictable they were, how easy it was to track their every move. They thought they were so clever, hiding their affair behind work meetings and business trips, but I saw through it all. One night, as I watched them from across the street at a cafe, I saw something that made my stomach turn. They were sitting at a small table near the window, laughing together, completely at ease in each other's company. C reached across the table and took Jennifer's hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture so intimate, so familiar, that it made my blood boil. She smiled at him, the same smile she used to give me. It was in that moment that I knew there was no going back. Whatever love I had once felt for Jennifer was gone, replaced by a cold, burning desire to see her suffer, to see them both suffer. With C and Roberts on edge, it wasn't hard to push them further. I started leaking small bits of information to my contact in financial crimes, just enough to keep the investigation moving without tipping C off that I was behind it. At the same time, I planted more rumors, feeding the growing paranoia within their operation. And then, when the timing was right, I made my move. I sent Jennifer an anonymous email, one that looked like it had come from someone inside C's operation. The email warned her that she was being watched, that her connection to C was known, and that if she didn't act fast, everything would come crashing down. I watched from across the room as she read the email, her face going pale, her hands trembling. She immediately picked up her phone and called C, her voice shaky as she asked him what was going on. I couldn't hear his side of the conversation, but I could imagine the panic in his voice as he tried to reassure her that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. The noose was tightening, and they both knew it. It all came to a head a week later, on the day C and Roberts were supposed to make their big offshore transfer. I had timed everything perfectly, making sure that the authorities were in place, ready to move in as soon as the money hit the account. It was a delicate operation, but I'd planned for every possible scenario. That morning, I left the house early, telling Jennifer I had a meeting downtown. She didn't question it. She was too distracted, too caught up in the whirlwind of lies she'd been spinning. I watched from a distance as she drove to meet C at the hotel where they'd planned to celebrate their final victory. They thought they were in the clear, that everything was about to pay off. But instead, they were walking into a trap. As I sat in my car, watching from across the street, I saw the unmarked police cars pull up to the hotel entrance. Officers in plain clothes exited the vehicles, moving quickly and efficiently toward the lobby. My heart raced as I realized that this was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I watched as the officers entered the hotel, disappearing from view. A few minutes later, I saw them escorting C and Jennifer out of the building, both of them in handcuffs. I sat back, a cold smile spreading across my face. It was over. I watched from the safety of my car as the unmarked police vehicles sped away, taking Jennifer and C with them. It was surreal seeing her in handcuffs, escorted like a criminal, her face pale and eyes wide with shock. I imagined her sitting in the back of that police car, confused and terrified, with no idea how it had all fallen apart so suddenly. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the satisfaction that came with seeing her brought low. She deserved this. She deserved everything that was about to happen to her. And as for C, well, he was a dead man walking. His entire operation was going to crumble under the weight of the investigation I'd set in motion, and the millions he had laundered would be traced right back to him. They were both finished. But as I sat there, watching the cars disappear down the street, I felt something else. Something hollow. It wasn't the rush of victory I'd imagined it would be. I thought I'd feel triumphant, like I'd finally won. But instead, there was only a numb emptiness. I'd spent so long planning this, so long putting every piece into place, that I hadn't stopped to consider what would come after. Now that it was over, now that Jennifer was gone and C was on his way to prison, What was left for me? I shook the thought off, forcing myself to focus. There would be time to deal with that later. For now, I needed to make sure everything went exactly as planned. I pulled out my phone and made a call. "It's done," I said when my contact in financial crimes answered. "Good," came the reply. "We've got enough on C to bury him, and the offshore accounts are already being flagged. This is going to blow up fast." "And Jennifer?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. "She's not in the system yet, but they'll bring her in for questioning. We don't have anything solid on her, but with her involvement in C's life, it'll be enough to shake things up. I'm guessing she'll try to make a deal, maybe throw C under the bus to save herself." I felt a bitter smile tug at the corners of my mouth. That sounded exactly like Jennifer. She'd do whatever it took to save her own skin. "That's fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just make sure she feels the pressure." The line went quiet for a moment, then my contact spoke again, softer this time. "Mark, are you sure about this? You've gone pretty deep here. This isn't just some infidelity case. You've blown up 2 lives." I stared out the windshield, watching the world outside continue as if nothing had happened. People were walking their dogs, heading to work, going about their normal lives, completely unaware that mine had just imploded. "I'm sure," I said, hanging up before he could say anything else. The days that followed were a whirlwind of media coverage, police investigations, and rumors swirling around both C and Jennifer. The story broke faster than I anticipated. Within hours of their arrest, news outlets were reporting on the money laundering scheme that had been exposed, and C's name was plastered all over the headlines. His company was in full-blown damage control mode, issuing statements about internal investigations and distancing themselves from him. But it wouldn't be enough. The authorities were already freezing his accounts, seizing assets, and questioning anyone who had been remotely connected to him. He was done. Jennifer's involvement was more complicated. She wasn't directly tied to the criminal activities, but her relationship with C was enough to put her under intense scrutiny. The media loved it, the scandal of a respected woman being caught in the middle of a financial crime web. The speculation was rampant. Was she involved? Did she know what C had been up to? Could she have helped him cover it up? It didn't matter whether she had known or not. Her reputation was ruined. I watched the fallout from a distance, keeping tabs on every new development. Jennifer's workplace was the first to cut ties with her. I wasn't surprised. No company wanted to be associated with someone linked to a scandal of this magnitude. She was officially on administrative leave. But I knew that was just corporate speak for "we're going to fire you as soon as it's safe." And C? His downfall was swifter. By the end of the week, he was facing multiple charges of money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. His assets were frozen, his bank accounts emptied, and he was being held without bail. It was all falling apart for him, faster than even I had expected. But despite everything, Jennifer was still free. For now. It was late in the evening when I heard the door to the house open. I had been sitting in the living room, staring at the wall, lost in thought, when I heard her footsteps in the hallway. She was back. Jennifer stepped into the living room, looking like she'd been through hell. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair a mess, her eyes red and puffy from crying. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, her face a mix of confusion, fear, and desperation. "They let me go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, not bothering to stand up. "I heard." She took a few tentative steps toward me, her eyes searching my face for some kind of understanding, some kind of explanation. "Mark, I don't know what's happening. I don't understand how it all went wrong so fast." I looked at her, my expression cold and unreadable. "You really don't, do you?" Her face crumpled, and she took another step closer, her voice breaking. "I didn't know, Mark. I didn't know what C was involved in. I swear to God I didn't. I never would have." I cut her off, standing up slowly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You think that makes it better?" I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "You think just because you didn't know about his criminal activities, it excuses everything else? The lies? The betrayal? The fact that you spent months sneaking around behind my back?" She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. Just happened." I repeated, my anger boiling over. You don't get to say it just happened. You made a choice, Jennifer. You chose to cheat. You chose to lie. And now you're paying the price. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I stood there, watching her, the woman I had once loved reduced to this pathetic, broken shell of herself. And yet, I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. For the next few minutes, Jennifer just cried, her shoulders shaking, her breath ragged. I stayed silent, standing a few feet away, waiting for her to pull herself together. I wasn't going to comfort her. I wasn't going to forgive her. When she finally looked up at me, her face was streaked with tears, her eyes bloodshot. Mark, please, we can fix this. We can still fix it. We can move past this. I shook my head, unable to believe the audacity of her words. There's no fixing this, I said quietly. You destroyed everything the moment you decided to cheat on me. But I love you, she whispered, reaching out toward me. I still love you. I never stopped loving you. Her words felt like knives, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I looked down at her, my heart as cold as ice. If you loved me, I said, my voice calm and measured, you never would have done this. You never would have lied to me, cheated on me, betrayed me. You don't get to say you love me, Jennifer. Not anymore. She broke down again, sobbing into her hands, her entire body trembling with the weight of her guilt. For a moment, I felt the slightest pang of sympathy, the tiniest flicker of the love I had once felt for her. But it was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. I'd given her everything, my trust, my loyalty, my love, and she had thrown it all away for a man like C. I had nothing left to give her. We're done, I said quietly, turning toward the door. I've already filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. Jennifer's sobs grew louder, but I didn't look back. I walked out of the house, leaving her behind in the wreckage she had created. I drove for hours that night, the city lights blurring together as I sped down empty streets. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. Away from the house, away from Jennifer, away from everything. The satisfaction I had imagined, the sense of closure I thought I'd feel after executing my revenge, it wasn't there. I'd won. I'd taken everything from her and C, destroyed their lives, but the victory felt hollow. Was this really what I wanted? I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I thought about everything I'd done, every step I'd taken to get to this point. I had planned it all so carefully, waited so patiently for the moment when I could watch Jennifer and C fall. And now, I had everything I'd wanted: revenge, justice, closure. But in the end, I'd lost something too. I'd lost the man I used to be. The man who believed in love, in trust, in loyalty. The man who would have fought for his marriage, who would have forgiven mistakes. I wasn't that man anymore. I was someone else now. Someone colder. Someone harder. I didn't know if I liked who I had become. The days that followed my final confrontation with Jennifer passed in a blur. I moved out of the house, leaving behind the life we had built together, the memories that no longer held any meaning. I didn't want to be in that place anymore. It was tainted by her betrayal. I couldn't walk into the kitchen without picturing her messaging C, laughing with him, lying to me with that same smile she used to give when she pretended everything was fine. I checked into a small apartment in the city, one that was empty of everything except the bare essentials: a bed, a table, a chair, and a window that overlooked a street I had no connection to. I needed distance. I needed space to process what I'd done. But the silence in the apartment was suffocating. There were no more plans to make, no more moves to orchestrate. The adrenaline that had fueled me for weeks was gone, leaving behind a hollow void that I didn't know how to fill. I had won, hadn't I? The media coverage surrounding C's downfall had intensified. His name was now synonymous with corruption and financial crime. Every day, new reports emerged, exposing more of his illicit dealings, more of the people he had scammed and manipulated. His trial was being fast-tracked, and it wouldn't be long before he was sentenced to years behind bars. Jennifer's story was more complex. She wasn't charged with any crimes, but the damage to her reputation was irreparable. The media painted her as C's lover, an accomplice who might not have known the details of his illegal activities, but who had certainly benefited from them. She was vilified in the press, her image plastered next to C's on every news site, every TV segment. Her life was destroyed. I thought that would bring me satisfaction. I thought watching her suffer, knowing she had lost everything, her job, her friends, her dignity, would make me feel vindicated. But instead, all I felt was a strange emptiness. I had set out to ruin her, and I had succeeded. So why did it feel like I'd ruined myself in the process? A week after I left the house, my lawyer called. "She's agreed to the divorce," he said, his voice crackling through the speakerphone. "No contest on the assets, no arguments over property. She's not fighting it." I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, feeling a weight settle in my chest. "So it's over," I said quietly. "It's over," he confirmed. "You'll be legally divorced within the next few weeks. You'll get the final paperwork soon." For a moment, I didn't respond. The reality of it hit me harder than I'd expected. After everything that had happened, after all the lies and the betrayal, it was hard to believe that the marriage I had once cherished, however flawed it had been, was about to end so simply, with nothing left to fight for. "Mark," my lawyer continued, his tone softer now, "she asked to see you. She wants to talk." I froze, my grip tightening on the phone. "Why?" "I don't know. Maybe she wants closure. Maybe she wants to apologize. Whatever it is, it's your call." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what I'd expected, but I certainly hadn't anticipated that she'd want to talk to me after everything. What could she possibly say that hadn't already been said? What could she do to undo the damage that had been done? And yet, part of me was curious. Part of me needed to see her one last time, if only to put this chapter of my life behind me once and for all. "Set it up," I said finally. We met at a small cafe on the edge of the city, a neutral location where neither of us had any history. It was one of those places where people came to disappear, to sit quietly and pretend the world wasn't falling apart around them. I arrived early, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee that I hadn't touched. My mind raced, trying to prepare for what was about to happen. I didn't know what I was expecting: tears, apologies, maybe some last-ditch attempt at reconciliation. But I knew that this was the final moment. After this, there would be nothing left to say. Jennifer arrived 10 minutes later. I barely recognized her. She looked thin, worn out, her eyes tired and her face pale. There was no makeup to cover the exhaustion that had settled in her features, no attempt to hide the weight of everything that had happened. She was a shadow of the woman she used to be. She spotted me and walked over slowly, hesitating before sitting down across from me. For a few moments, we sat in silence, neither of us knowing where to begin. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and fragile. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I nodded but didn't say anything. I wanted her to speak first. I wanted to hear what she had to say. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly as she played with the edge of her coat. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about everything, about us, about what I did, and I'm so sorry, Mark." Her words hung in the air between us, but I didn't respond. I wasn't here for apologies. Jennifer took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve it. I just wanted to, I don't know, explain." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Explain what?" I asked, my voice cold. "Explain why you cheated on me for months? Explain why you lied to my face every day while you were sneaking around with that guy?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, biting her lip as she struggled to hold herself together. "Yes, I owe you that much." I waited, giving her the space to speak, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no anger. Just a cold, detached emptiness. "It started when I met C at work," she began, her voice trembling. "At first, it was just business, just harmless conversations. But then, things started to change. I don't know how it happened, Mark. I really don't. One day, we were just colleagues, and the next, we were something else. I didn't plan for it. I didn't want it to happen." "You didn't want it to happen?" I repeated, my voice laced with bitterness. That's your excuse? She flinched, but she didn't back down. No, it's not an excuse. There's no excuse for what I did. I know that. I know I should have come to you, told you what was going on, but I was scared. I was scared that you'd hate me, that you'd leave me. You were right about one thing, I said coldly. Her tears started to flow freely now, her hands trembling as she tried to wipe them away. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect it. I just wanted you to know that I never stopped loving you, Mark. Not once. Even when I was with him, I thought about you. Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. The anger that had been simmering inside me for months started to bubble up again, and for a moment, I couldn't contain it. You thought about me? I said, my voice rising, while you were in his bed, while you were sneaking around with him behind my back. Don't you dare try to make this about love, Jennifer. You don't get to play the victim here. She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I know I ruined everything. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. I watched her cry, her body trembling with the weight of her guilt, and I wondered if this was what I had wanted all along. To see her broken, destroyed, reduced to nothing. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was the same emptiness that had haunted me since the day I walked out of our house. I loved you, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away. She nodded through her tears, unable to look at me. I know. I stood up, my heart heavy with the finality of it all. This is the last time we'll see each other. The papers are being processed, and soon enough, we'll be legally done. But after today, we're finished, Jennifer. You're not part of my life anymore. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with sorrow. I'm sorry, she whispered, but it was too late for sorry. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind once and for all. The divorce went through quickly after that meeting. There was no contest, no arguments. Jennifer didn't fight for anything. Not the house, not the money, nothing. She had nothing left to fight for. The media coverage of C's trial continued, and I kept tabs on it from a distance. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for his role in the money laundering scheme, and his assets were seized by the government. His life, like Jennifer's, was over. As for me, I moved on, or at least, I tried to. I stayed in the small apartment for a while, trying to rebuild my life, trying to figure out who I was now that everything had come crashing down. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost more than I had gained. The revenge I had orchestrated, the carefully calculated plan I had put into motion, had destroyed both Jennifer and C. But it had destroyed a part of me, too. I wasn't the same man I had been before. I had become someone colder, someone more detached, someone who had let the thirst for revenge consume him. And now that it was over, I didn't know how to go back to being the person I had once been. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.